Okay, I want you to imagine something for a second. Think of a massive economic engine that quietly moves 95% of an entire nation's trade. It fuels the energy grid, it literally defends the borders, and yet it does all of this almost entirely out of sight out on the open ocean. We so often think of the maritime sector as just, well, water and ships. But to truly understand global power today, we really have to look at the oceans as the invisible backbone of national survival, technology, and economic transformation.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unlocking a comprehensive strategic mental model of a truly massive geopolitical transformation, India's maritime strategy, and the Amrit Kaal blueprint. I'm going to guide you through the policies, the staggering economics, and the global chess moves happening right now on the high seas. So let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the Amrit Kaal vision, drill down into the anatomy of maritime trade, navigate the current choke points, break down the strategic reforms, zoom out to the global blue economy, and wrap up with a quick concept revision.
Let's start with our first focus, the Amrit Kaal vision, charting the next 25 years.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how this bridges ancient tradition with the hypermodern world. Amrit Kaal actually originates in Vedic astrology. It's considered the absolute best, most auspicious time to start new work. But strategically, this concept has been completely repurposed into a rigorous roadmap for the nation's future. The goal isn't just slow, gradual growth. It's what the strategy calls complete saturation of development. We're talking about a technology-driven, knowledge-based economy with minimal government interference in daily life. It means complete coverage. Every village has roads, every family's plugged into health insurance and banking, and all of this relies heavily on public participation to actually work. To really visualize this, let's map out the timeline, because this isn't just a political buzzword. It started in 2021, when the roadmap was first unveiled by the Prime Minister. Then, it took a very concrete shape in 2023 at the Global Maritime India Summit, where the Vision 2047 blueprint was officially launched. And 2047? That's the ultimate target year. It marks a century of independence and serves as the strict deadline for achieving absolute blue economy supremacy through sustainable practices and global collaboration. All right, moving to part 2, the anatomy of maritime trade, which is the current engine of growth. 95%. Just let that sink in for a second. This staggering number represents the volume of all domestic and international trade moving through India's seaports. Think about that. Almost everything built, bought, or sold relies on this one network. It all happens across a massive coastline stretching over 7,500 kilometers, running through 12 major ports and over 200 minor ports, connecting to more than 200 countries and territories around the world. It is a monumental logistical web. So why does this matter? Well, this massive physical movement translates directly into deep economic impact, creating a 5% bump to the nation's total GDP. But look at how it breaks down. You've got the direct side, the literal ships, the shipbuilding, the day-to-day port operations. But then you have this massive web of indirect contributions, like coastal development, local tourism, and fisheries. When you put it all together, this integrated machine sustains over 10 million jobs. That's livelihoods for entire coastal regions, all dependent on this one sector. But hey, economics? That's really just one piece of the puzzle. This whole setup perfectly illustrates why maritime dominance is fundamentally non-negotiable. It's really about interconnected security spheres. First, you have energy security. A huge portion of the nation's oil and gas arrives via these sea routes. If those lanes aren't secure, the power grid literally goes dark. Then there's national security. A 7,500-kilometer coastline requires serious 24/7 vigilance against piracy, smuggling, and terrorism. And finally, economic security, meaning safely tapping into the blue economy through seabed mining, aquaculture, and fisheries to make sure growth is actually self-sustained for the long haul. Of course, every complex system has its friction points. Let's jump to part 3, navigating the choke points, looking at the roadblocks slowing things down. We can basically categorize these vulnerabilities into 2 buckets: physical and environmental. On the physical side, we're dealing with severe infrastructure deficits. The demand for trade is booming, but it's creating huge bottlenecks at the ports, exposing out-of-date shipyards and clogging up coastal highways. But honestly, the environmental threats are equally dangerous. We're looking at ecological damage from ship emissions and devastating oil spills. Add to that the biological threats of illegal fishing practices wiping out biodiversity, and the overarching threat of climate change causing rising sea levels and extreme weather. These aren't just minor inconveniences.
They are dual threats to global trade and human life.
So how do you dismantle these massive roadblocks? That brings us to part 4, strategic initiatives and reform, where we engineer the future.
Let's break down the Sagarmala project. Now, don't just think of this as a list of construction goals. Think of it as a highly deliberate problem-solving mechanism for port-led industrialization. Step 1 is simply identifying the exact connectivity gaps that are holding back logistics. Step 2 is throwing heavy investment directly into modernizing the ports, the shipyards, and the highways. And Step 3 is the outcome: massive capacity upgrades and a radical boost in trade efficiency. It's essentially about transforming the coastline from a simple border into a highly optimized industrial zone.
And this illustrates something really clever about the strategy. It operates on 2 parallel tracks. On one hand, you have Make in India. That is strictly industrial, boasting domestic shipbuilding so the country is self-reliant in producing its own vessels. But aggressive industrialization can wreck the environment, right? So running right alongside it is the Blue Economy Initiative. This focuses entirely on sustainable resources, renewable energy, and ecotourism. The whole point here is that you absolutely cannot have industrial self-sufficiency without long-term ecological balance. They have to work together. Okay, let's zoom out to the global stage for part 5, the global blue economy, looking at GMIS 2023 and beyond. The 2023 Global Maritime India Summit wasn't just a domestic meetup, it was a major geopolitical launchpad. Ministers from Europe, Africa, South America, and Asia all came together to integrate logistics. And look at the vital international networks advancing here. We're talking about the IME Sea Corridor, deep integration in the BIMSTEC region, the Chabahar port development, and expanding the INTSC. This is no longer just about local logistics. It is about plugging regional capabilities directly into the main arteries of global trade. What's really fascinating here is the ambition. The goal isn't just to participate in the global market, it's to lead it. The summit put a huge emphasis on sustainable development, specifically green ports and shipping. The idea is to adopt leading practices, kind of like Norway's famous green port standards, to attract global partners. By embracing cutting-edge marine tech and eco-friendly logistics, the aim is to literally set the standards that the rest of the maritime world will eventually have to follow. And guess what? The global market is totally buying into this vision. 10 lakh crores. That is the staggering investment figure anchored during just that 3-day summit in 2023. To put that in perspective, that's not just a capital injection. It is a massive vote of global confidence. It proves that international stakeholders believe this highly automated, tech-driven strategy is actually going to work. All right, let's bring it all home with part 6, final analysis and revision. Time for some concept mastery. Let's systematically review these core anchors to make sure this all sticks. First, the vision. Keep 2047 in your head. The Amrit Kaal blueprint is driving toward a fully saturated, tech-driven state. Second, the scale. Never forget that 95% of trade volume moves by sea, sustaining 10 million jobs and securing the energy grid. Third, the hurdles. It's a constant tightrope walk between fixing massive infrastructure deficits and fighting climate change. Fourth, the solutions. Sagarmala optimizes the physical ports, while Make in India builds the ships for total self-reliance. And finally, geopolitics. Massive investments are connecting domestic ports to huge global corridors. Which leaves us with this final thought. We've just mapped out an incredibly aggressive, well-funded mechanism for transformation. But as global supply chains face totally unprecedented, unpredictable pressures from climate events and shifting geopolitics, we have to ask ourselves, will these bold infrastructural reforms actually be resilient enough to secure supreme maritime dominance by 2047? It's a complex puzzle, and it's one that will absolutely define the global economic order over the next 2 decades. Keep analyzing, keep connecting those dots, and thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.